The people getting ahead of you, they're not more disciplined than you. They're just solving a different equation. And once you see that equation, you can't unsee it. You start wondering why you're still working as hard as them and still falling behind. You start wondering why anyone ever told you the answer is to just wake up at 5 a.m. and want it more. So this video is about the actual math of getting ahead. Not the inspiration or the discipline, but the actual math. Because at some point you have to admit that trying harder is not an actual strategy. It's just a feeling, and they are completely different. The entire self-improvement or motivation industry is built on selling you the same variable. They tell you to fix your discipline, fix your morning routine, and you do all of that. And you still feel like you're not getting anywhere and think that the problem is you. I'm here to tell you that the problem isn't you, but the equation they gave you is completely wrong. Here's where most self-improvement falls apart. People treat getting ahead like it's a linear. You push, you grind, you hustle, and the more you push, the more you get back. 1 hour in means 1 hour of progress out. But life doesn't work like that. Life compounds, and compounding isn't linear. It's exponential, which means the formula you've been told, input in, output out, is completely wrong. The actual shape of getting ahead looks more like this. Output equals input times leverage raised to the power of time. And most people, barely even touch one of them. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the input. Input is discipline, motivation, the time you put into something in a day. The stuff that fills 90% of the whole motivation content. Wake up early, journal, cold showers, habit tracker, and so on and so on. Now here's something that nobody really tells you. The science behind this doesn't really hold up. The whole idea of willpower not being an infinite resource is just a theory called ego depletion. Roy Boymister published it in the late 90s, and the entire self-help motivation industry was built around it. And you probably heard the idea before, that your willpower runs out. That's why you need to make important decisions in the morning. That's why Steve Jobs wore the same t-shirt every single morning, decision fatigue. Except in 2016, 23 different research labs ran a coordinated replication of the original ego depletion experiment. Over 2,000 participants, and they found basically nothing. Then in 2024, another team, but 36 labs this time, with 3,500 participants, got the same results. The effect didn't show up. So the whole idea of that you shouldn't waste your willpower on small decisions is not really true. Same thing with the marshmallow test that you probably did hear about before. The kids who can wait for the second marshmallow do better in life. For 30 years, that was the gospel of delayed gratification. Proof that willpower in childhood can predict success in adulthood. Except when researchers did replicate this in 2018, with a sample 10 times larger and more diverse. The effect was half of the size of the original, and most of what was left wasn't even willpower. It was socioeconomic background. Kids weren't winning because they could resist a marshmallow. They were winning because they came from environments where waiting actually did pay off. I'm not saying that discipline doesn't matter, because it does, but it matters in a really specific way. It can be your engine, but it doesn't give you the destination. And here's the second thing about input, that it has a limit, and a very hard one. You can't just work 25 hours a day. You can't focus more than being completely focused. You can't push your body past its limits too. Ericsson, the guy who studied elite performance and athletes across chess, music, and sports, found that even world-class practice maxes out at about 4 hours a day. Newport calls the same thing deep work. And the people who do it for 2 to 4 hours a day every single day are the ones who actually pull ahead. So basically the input is real. It does matter, but it has its limits. And once you hit those limits, pushing harder won't do anything for you. Which is why many people who work harder than everyone else still doesn't get ahead. They are already on the limit of their output, and they just don't think about the other two variables in the equation. Now here's where the equation actually changes. Leverage. It's what your input gets multiplied with before the time even enters the equation. Naval Ravikant breaks the leverage into 4 types: labor, capital, code, and media. Labor is basically other people working for you, and it's the oldest type of leverage, but it's also the messiest. Because managing people working for you is a whole skill in itself. Capital, as you could guess, is just money. You make a decision and you back it up with capital, and then the decision multiplies. This is how most of the wealth got built in the last 100 years. But it requires you to already have capital or make someone with capital trust you. And then there's the 2 new ones, which is code and media. And these two are more specific and different than the first two because they are permissionless. You don't need to hire anyone and you don't need to raise money. You write a piece of code or you make a piece of content, and then it works for you while you're asleep. Let me give you an example. Let's say you spend an hour making a coffee for just one customer, and that's basically 1 hour of input, which equals 1 unit of output. It's linear. Now let's say you spend an hour writing code that automates coffee orders for 10,000 shops. The input here is the same, which is 1 hour, but the output is not. That's basically the leverage. And the gap between someone who has leverage and someone who doesn't, it's not twice or 100, but thousands times. Because leverage doesn't add to your input, but it multiplies it. Most people, when they try to get ahead, they are picking up more shifts at a coffee shop, for example. Metaphorically, they are attaching input on a variable without any leverage attached. And then they wonder why 2,000 hours of input didn't produce the same results as someone who did only 200 hours. Now here's the catch with leverage. It doesn't just appear, but it gets built. And building leverage can look very slow and boring. It looks very unproductive from the outside, and it looks like nothing is really happening. Writing code that nobody is using yet, making content that nobody watches yet, building a skill that doesn't pay anything yet, or learning something that won't matter for the next 3 years. That's why most people who are actually getting ahead look lazy to other people who aren't. Because from the outside, the early stages of building leverage look identical to wasting time because there's no output yet. But the difference and the actual output shows up later with time, which brings us to the third variable, time. And time is the thing that nobody wants to hear about because it's boring. Time is doing the same thing for 3 years or months. But in the equation, time isn't the multiplier here. It's the exponent. And an exponent, if you know math, do something that no multiplier could ever do. James Clear from Atomic Habits has the famous version of this. If you get 1% better at one thing every single day, after a year you are 37 times better. After 2 years, it's 1400 times. Now in real life, it doesn't really look like that. 1% isn't really sustainable forever. Life isn't a clean compound interest rate, but the shape of the curve is correct. The early years of doing something and getting ahead look very flat, but then later, the curve go vertical. And that's the part that breaks people, because the flat part is boring. The flat part is long. It could take years, months. The only people who actually get to the vertical part of the curve, they are not the smartest. They are not the most disciplined. They are the ones who didn't quit during the flat part. And that's basically it. That's the whole secret of getting ahead of others. So let me summarize everything and put it all together. Input, which is capped at around 4 hours a day, is the variable that's everyone obsessed over, but it's the smallest one too. Leverage, which is the actual multiplier, permissionless if you choose code or media, but it's slow to build. It looks like nothing for ages, but it's the most important variable. Now time, the exponent, it's long and boring in early years, but unbeatable later on. And it's the variable that nobody wants to be in. And the people getting ahead of you, they accidentally found out and learned, sometimes by accident or not, that they were focusing on the wrong variable for a long time. They switched their input to a high leverage activity. They stayed on those flat years or months for a while. They survived those flat years or months, and the equation did the rest for them. And that's basically it. It's not about a personality. It's not about waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning. It's not about discipline. It's just a math problem. And here's why it matters. Because once you accept the math, you stop blaming yourself for not wanting it more. You stop watching motivational videos at 2 a.m. You stop trying fixing your input when your input is already fine. You can be the most disciplined person in the entire friend group and still fall behind. Because if everyone around you picked a higher leverage thing to be disciplined about, you will automatically fall behind. Because also discipline on the wrong variable is just expensive for you. It's just hours you wasted every single day on something that will never do anything for your future. So the question here isn't how can I become more disciplined? The question is, what should I be disciplined about? And am I willing to look like nothing is happening for 2 years or even more? And that's a much harder question to answer because the actual answer doesn't feel productive. It doesn't feel like anything is happening. But anyways, motivation is just a feeling, while discipline is a habit. Compounding is just math, and math doesn't really care if you like it or not, it just exists. So drop it in the comments, what variable are you focusing on right now in your life? I'm genuinely interested. Thank you all for watching and subscribe for more.